Welcome to Mr. Haunt's dungeon where the darkness comes alive. Dive into spine-chilling tales and eerie encounters that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you love the thrill of a good scare, hit that subscribe button and join us for new frightening and true stories. Don't miss out. Fear awaits. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get to the story. I've always been drawn to the abandoned and forgotten. There's a certain thrill in exploring places that have long since been vacated by their original inhabitants, their stories left to rot along with the walls that once contained them. So when I heard rumors about an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods, miles away from any beaten path, I knew I had to check it out. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I set out. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of color that promises an early dusk. I packed my backpack with the essentials: a flashlight, extra batteries, my camera, a first aid kit, and some snacks. I made sure my phone was fully charged, though I doubted I'd get any signal out there. With my gear ready, I set off. The trail started at the edge of a small, sleepy town. It wound its way through a dense forest, the trees towering above me like ancient sentinels. The leaves had turned a riot of colors, reds, oranges, and yellows, and crunched underfoot as I walked. The air was cool and smelled of earth and decaying leaves. Occasionally a squirrel would dart across the path, and birds chirped high in the branches, but otherwise the forest was eerily silent. The path was well worn at first, likely used by local hikers and nature enthusiasts. After about an hour of walking, it began to narrow and become less distinct. Brambles and thorny bushes encroached on the trail, and I had to push through them, the thorns snagging my clothes and scratching my skin. I consulted my map and compass frequently, making sure I was still heading in the right direction. According to the old map I had found in the town's library, the cabin was at least 5 miles into the forest, far from any established paths. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the trees grew denser, their branches intertwining above me to form a canopy that blocked out much of the light. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and fallen branches. I stumbled more than once, cursing under my breath. Despite the difficulty, there was something exhilarating about the isolation. I felt like an adventurer, uncovering secrets lost to time. About 3 miles in, I came across a small clearing. In the center stood an old, weathered signpost, its wood cracked and splintered. The lettering was barely legible, but I could just make out the word cabin and an arrow pointing further into the forest. Encouraged, I pressed on, the path now little more than a faint trail, barely distinguishable from the surrounding undergrowth. The forest grew darker as the afternoon waned. The sunlight, already dimmed by the thick canopy, took on a muted, almost otherworldly quality. Shadows stretched long and deep, and the air grew colder. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my breath coming in visible puffs. The sense of foreboding I had felt earlier returned, stronger now. It was as if the forest itself was warning me to turn back. After another mile, I finally saw it through the trees, the cabin. It sat in a small, overgrown clearing, surrounded by a ring of ancient oaks. The structure was more dilapidated than I had imagined, with sagging roof shingles and boarded-up windows. Ivy and moss clung to the walls, and the once white paint was now a dull, peeling gray. A weathered "No Trespassing" sign hung crookedly on what was left of the front porch railing, swaying slightly in the breeze. Ignoring the sign, I pushed through the underbrush and approached the cabin. The door, hanging slightly ajar, creaked ominously as I nudged it open. I stepped inside, and the air was thick with dust and the smell of mold. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I made my way through the small entryway into what must have once been the living room. A fireplace dominated one wall, its bricks blackened from countless fires. An old, moth-eaten armchair sat in one corner, and a tattered rug covered part of the floor. I pulled out my flashlight and began to explore. In the kitchen, a rusty stove and a broken refrigerator stood as silent reminders of the lives once lived here. Cans of food, their labels faded and peeling, lined the shelves. Cobwebs hung like ghostly drapes from the ceiling corners, and the sink was filled with a murky, stagnant pool of water. Upstairs, I found two small bedrooms. One contained a rotting bed frame, the mattress long gone, leaving only the rusted springs behind. The other held a broken dresser, its drawers half open and filled with decaying clothes. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of abandonment and decay, yet there was also a strange sense of unease, as if the place had been left in a hurry. As I made my way back downstairs, I noticed something odd. A door I hadn't seen before, half hidden behind a stack of old newspapers, was slightly ajar. Curious, I approached it and pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. My heart began to race. A basement. Of course there would be a basement. I descended slowly, my flashlight barely cutting through the thick darkness. The air grew colder with each step, and a strange sense of foreboding settled over me. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, damp room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with dusty jars and old tools. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, and on it, an array of strange occult objects, candles, a rusty knife, and what appeared to be a human skull. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. I was plunged into complete darkness, save for the narrow cone of light from my flashlight. Panic surged through me as I rushed back to the stairs, only to find the door locked. No matter how hard I pushed or kicked, it wouldn't budge. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I tried to calm myself. It was then that I heard a faint whispering, just on the edge of hearing. I swung my flashlight around, trying to locate the source, but saw nothing. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and I could make out words, though they were in a language I didn't understand. The temperature continued to drop, my breath now visible in the frigid air. The whispering gave way to a low, guttural growl, and I felt a cold hand brush against my neck. I screamed, dropping my flashlight. The room was plunged into darkness, the only sound my own panicked breathing. I fumbled for the flashlight, finally finding it and switching it back on. The beam illuminated the table, and I saw that the skull was now facing me, empty eye sockets seeming to stare into my very soul. The growling grew louder, and I realized it was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, the beam of light revealing a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, and let out a bone-chilling scream. I bolted for the stairs, adrenaline fueling my frantic escape. I threw myself against the door repeatedly until, with a final, desperate shove, it burst open. I scrambled up the stairs and through the cabin, the thing behind me hot on my heels. As I reached the front door, I felt a cold hand close around my ankle, dragging me back. I kicked out wildly, connecting with something solid, and the grip loosened. As I struggled to my feet, I heard laughter, high-pitched, eerie, and echoing through the cabin. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the space with a sinister presence. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around, trying to pinpoint the source. Shadows danced on the walls, contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for me. I dashed toward the nearest window, hoping to smash my way out, but the glass seemed impossibly thick, refusing to break no matter how hard I struck it. The laughter grew louder, more maniacal, as if mocking my futile attempts to escape. In the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure, half hidden in the darkness, watching me with those same glowing yellow eyes. Suddenly, the air grew colder still, and I could see my breath in front of me. The whispering returned, louder now, and I could make out individual voices, speaking in a chorus of different languages, all chanting the same unsettling melody. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I felt a suffocating pressure in my chest. I turned and ran back toward the basement stairs, thinking that maybe, just maybe, there might be another way out down there. As I descended, I felt the temperature drop further, the darkness becoming almost tangible, like a thick fog that clung to my skin. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frantic. Reaching the bottom, I shone my flashlight around the room, desperately searching for any exit. My light fell upon a corner I hadn't noticed before, where an old, rotting door stood ajar. I ran toward it, my hopes rising. But as I approached, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, the force of it causing dust and debris to rain down from the ceiling. Suddenly, the room was alive with movement. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming ghastly, nightmarish figures. They circled me, their whispers now a cacophony of anger and despair. I felt something cold and slimy brush against my arm, and I recoiled in horror, shining my flashlight wildly around the room. In the corner, the skull had moved again, now perched on the edge of the table, its jaw hanging open as if in a silent scream. The candles around it burst into flame, casting an eerie, flickering light that only seemed to make the shadows more menacing. The air was thick with the smell of burning wax and something else, something rotten and decayed. Desperate, I turned back to the stairs, but as I did, I saw a figure blocking my path. It was the same tall, gaunt figure from before, its yellow eyes fixed on me with a predatory hunger. It raised one bony hand, and I felt an invisible force slam into me, knocking me to the ground. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, spinning across the floor and casting crazed shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and the laughter returned, echoing around me. I crawled toward the flashlight, my hands shaking, and as I reached for it, I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my wrist. I looked up and saw the figure standing over me, its mouth opening in a wide, unnatural grin. It began to speak, its voice a gravelly, guttural whisper that seemed to resonate within my skull. "You should not have come here," it said. "This place is ours." With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked my wrist free and grabbed the flashlight, shining it directly at the figure. It recoiled, hissing, and I took the opportunity to scramble to my feet and run for the stairs. As I did, the door to the basement flew open, and I heard a chorus of voices screaming in rage and frustration. I sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and burst into the main part of the cabin. The front door was still closed, but now it seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the wood warping and twisting, as if alive. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted with all my strength, feeling a jolt of electricity shoot up my arm. The door creaked open, and I threw myself outside, the cold air hitting me like a wall. I didn't stop to look back. I ran through the forest, branches whipping at my face and arms, the sounds of the cabin, whispers, laughter, growls, fading with each step. I didn't stop until I was well away from the cabin, the sounds of the forest swallowing up any trace of the thing that had chased me. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. It took me hours to find my way back to my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the cabin or that creature behind me, but there was nothing, just the trees and the fading light of day. I don't know what I encountered in that cabin, and I don't ever plan on finding out. Some places are abandoned for a reason, their stories better left in the dark.